Hello everybody and welcome to our tutorial today on making a first-person game that's all about collecting items in 3D using Unity version 6.2.2. So let's get straight into it. There are going to be a number of major parts today. I'm going to turn this into a two-part video. What we'll end up working by the end of this is being able to import the starter assets, being able to move around in the first person, experimenting with our character's properties, adding a collectible item of some description, making those collectible items despawn when our character touches them, and making those collectible items increase a score when they are despawned. Part 2, we're going to be displaying a score on a screen, adding static enemies, i.e. they're not going to move around, they're just going to represent something like a spike pit, restarting the player's position when you touch the enemy, setting up a timer to reset the game when it reaches 0, displaying the timer on screen, and then adding some minor polish. So let's get straight into it. Our first element today is importing the starter asset inside of Unity in a fresh project. So what we have inside of Unity Hub, open up Unity Hub. If you don't already have Unity Hub open, it should look a little bit like this. Make sure you're signed in. We're going to create a new project by clicking up here, new project. We're going to choose a core template. And the template we would like is the universal 3D. It may be in a slightly different position, so just be careful of that. Universal 3D is the one that we want. It's important we give it an appropriate name and we put it in the correct location. If you are doing this at college, it must be in your users folder in source and repos. Number of easy ways of getting there, but the easiest way of getting there is by choosing this PC, going into your users folder and finding source and repos, or by default it will just appear with source and repos and choosing it from there. Give it an appropriate name. I'm going to call this project FPS, the first person shooter. Now we're not going to do a shooter, but it's almost out of habit now. I have a first person game and I'm going to call it FPS, so let's go with that. If you wanted to take this starting point and add shooter mechanics to it later, there'll be further tutorials on how to do that. Make sure it's talking to source and repos, you've given it an appropriate name, and you've selected that appropriate version. Now, this will take a little bit of time for it to build. And because this is just going to sit and wait, let's talk about one I've got prepared earlier. So I've already got a Unity version of the project open up. And this is what we want to have. So all the steps to go from where we were to here, obviously Unity's just waking up and that's going to take some time. In order to get to this screen here, you want to go to Window. You want to go from here to the Package Management settings and go to the Asset Store. If you've already signed yourself in, it'll be signed in top right hand corner. It'll take me a second for it to pop up, but it will wake up, I promise you. And what we're interested in searching for is our first person starting point. Now, I'm just going to go with the search I've used before, but I actually think it's called the starter assets. It's going to be the easiest thing to go for. So the starter asset, what we're searching for. And of course, you can find all these different starter assets. You've got different character controllers, third person, first person controllers. If these don't appear, you can change the price to free, and that will narrow down the search, making sure you're getting the correct things. Now, these kind of look the same, so make sure you're choosing the first person, not the third person. You don't want the picture of the character in it, you want the one that hasn't got a picture of a character in it. Starter assets, first person, made by Unity Technologies. Give that a click. Add that to your assets, and then you may get a download button that pops up as well once that has been added to your assets. You can see that it's now signed in as me and woken up. So I'm going to open this in Unity. You can see I've got a big long list in the package manager, which is a critical thing we'll be using a lot on this project. You can see any assets you've previously downloaded from the asset store appear in this list here. Starter assets, it may need an update, but there'll be an option over here to download, and then there'll be an option to import. So just make sure you've selected those options, and then you've got these starter assets sitting down there. Once that has loaded in, you'll see a change in the space down here. So you will still see something that looks like this, a blank scene, even after you have imported those starter assets. But what you will find in the assets area, which you can click by clicking assets or choosing assets up here, you'll now see a new folder called starter assets. If you give that a click, what you'll then find under here is the first person controller, which is this one here, and in there a folder called scenes, and then in there a file called playground. This icon means a Unity scene. Every time I use the word scene, I want you to imagine game level. So I'm going to open this level, which is called playground, give it a double click, and everything will disappear. Now, this doesn't mean that you've lost any work you've done in your previous scene. It's still there. If I go back to assets in scenes, sample scene is still there, not lost it. But navigating back to where we were, starter assets, first person controller, scenes, playground, that opens up this scene instead. Now, what you can see in this area is a significant amount of information on the hierarchy. And we're going to give this a quick play test to make sure everything works as it should. So press play at the top, use mouse to look around, W, A, S and D to move around, space to jump, shift to run. Just make sure everything works as it should. And then to leave play mode, if your cursor has vanished, press escape and then left click the stop button and it will go out of play mode. Really important to remember that you must be out of play mode if you are going to make changes to your scene. So here's what we've just done. We have imported the starter assets. Well done you. Give yourself a pat on the back. Next thing we're going to do is experiment with the character's properties. What I mean by that is if I go to the player capsule, you will see a series of information on the right hand side in the inspector that you can change if you want. Now, because we want to change these properties but be able to have them go back to what they were, just some things I'd like to point out. The importance of being able to press Ctrl and Z to undo a change that you've just done and can't remember what a setting was. So for example here, if I change my move speed from 4 and I set that to 10, you'll get a line next to it indicating that that has changed. That is now in bold. And I'm going to test what that looks like. So my move speed should now be a lot faster, which it is. But if I decide I don't want that change, I can press Ctrl and Z. Or if I add that change again, you can right click on anyone that's gone bold with a blue line next to it, right click, and you can revert that back to its original settings from when you downloaded this from the asset store. Another technique you can use is during play mode, while the game is actively running, you can change these settings. And anything you change while it is in play mode, while that button is blue, will get forgotten when you leave play mode. This means it can be worthwhile for testing some things and you know you're going to be able to experiment a lot. So if I change my jump height from 1.2 to 12, for example, it should be 10 times as strong. I press space, I jump 10 times as high. If I leave play mode by pressing escape, get my cursor back and leave in play mode, it goes back to 1.2. So a useful trick. I'm going to give you some time to have an experiment with those settings, making sure you can revert them when you're ready. Okay, hopefully now we're in a position where we can take this template and start adding things for the player to do. Currently there is no objective, so let's go and add something for the player to accomplish. We want something to be collectible. To do that, we're going to add something that will look like a coin. Now I'm feeling particularly lazy today, so let's make a game object, a 3D object, and a cylinder that's going to represent our coin. Our cylinder will appear in the middle of your view, which isn't the middle of your world. It just so happens to be wherever you are looking when you create an object. So it's always going to be in the center of your view. And you can see it's appeared in the hierarchy and it's got a name called cylinder. Let's change its name over here to coin and press enter. Remember, you can use your right mouse click to look around, and while you're holding down the right mouse button, you can use W, A, S and D to move around while you're in view mode. Make sure that you're not in play mode. We don't want to make any changes while we're in play mode. We have our ability to move, rotate and scale our coin, so you can move it into any position that you like, and you can use the scale tool to flatten it a little bit. So I'm going to flatten this coin, and we're also going to rotate it 90 degrees. Now, if I want this to be precise, you're going to find that's quite difficult to do by trying to rotate it just by using this tool which we call the gizmo. But by rotating it, you'll see that its transform properties have changed. It's now got a rotation of -43. If I wanted that to be exactly 90, I could just go over here and type -90, and you'll know it'd be nice and squared up. Or you can turn a snapping on over here, or you can hold down the control key, which will turn rotation snapping on as well. You can do the same. Holding down control key will activate snaps and move in 1 unit increments, which you can see on the grid on the floor. We're not going to bother making this particularly pretty, we're just going to make a coin. And once we can collect that 1 coin, later on we'll add points associated to that. You'll notice that there's the flat cylinder, and there's also this shape around it, which is a sphere. That's represented here by this capsule collider. That's the actual thing that the player is going to be able to interact with. If I press play to show you what this capsule collider does, you'll notice if I walk over to it, it should stop me walking through it, which is I can't walk through that object. But it is the shape of a capsule. It is round. There isn't a collider for flat. If you wanted a perfectly flat collider, you have to do that through boxes and box colliders, which we'll look at in more detail. But you can change the size of the capsule collider by adjusting its radius, should you want it to be bigger than the actual shape that it represents. What we're interested in doing here, though, is turning this collider, which stops the player walking through it, into a trigger by choosing the Is Trigger button here. Interesting. Is Trigger, give that a click. Now the player should be able to walk through it, which is our test we're doing here. That is passing my test. It did what I expected. What we can do is use that fact that it detected a collision but didn't stop the player walking through it to then say, I have been collected, go and get some points. In order to do this, we're going to add a script to our player, and we're going to say to our player, when I touch something that knows it's a coin, make some score go up. Okay? But this is going to be a 2-part task. We've added the collectible. That's where we are right now. We've added it. The next thing is going to be making it despawn when touched. Then we're going to make the score go up. Both of these are going to be contained in a script. So with my player capsule, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the inspector, add a new component, and this is a script we're going to write, which I'm going to call score with an uppercase S, all one word. S-C-O-R-E, notice the uppercase S, and it will say to me, hey, that doesn't currently exist. Do you want to make a new script? Yes, I do. And you sure you want to call it score? Yes, I do. Create and add that, please. It will then say where we want to save it. So let's make a new folder that's going to be called scripts. With our scripts folder selected, you can open and then save it. What this means is if you look down here in the asset space, I've now got a new folder called scripts, and inside of there should be a new script, which is hopefully called score. There it is. So with my player capsule selected, we can see that our new script has been added, and currently our new script does nothing. But if you go down to where it says score here, that's grayed out, you can double click on that and it will open it in Visual Studio. It comes with some pre-made code that we're going to build on top of. I will go through this in more detail for those who are interested, but what we want to do here is replace everything from line 5 all the way to line 15. I'm going to delete it, and we're going to replace it with something else. We're going to replace it with a onTriggerEnter event. I start writing it, the IntelliSense will do the rest for me. I want onTriggerEnter. Don't want the 2D, I want onTriggerEnter. I can left click or press enter, and it will write the rest of the section of code for me. This is what's called a method, otherwise known as a function. So onTriggerEnter. Once something has entered into this trigger zone, I want to delete it. Now I'm deliberately doing this wrong. So what I'm going to write here is on line 7, when my player touches something, destroy that something, despawn it. If you can already guess the problem with this, have some fun. But this is what we're going to try. I intend to destroy, and then in regular brackets, the other thing I have collided with dot its game object. Close bracket, semicolon to say that we're done. Now, if you haven't clocked onto it yet, the problem here is my player is going to touch something, and that something will be destroyed. If it touches anything, including the floor. So let's see what this does. That script isn't finished until you've clicked save or pressed Ctrl and S. The indicator that it's not saved is if you get a little asterisk up here, little star. So I'm going to press Ctrl and S. I now know that is saved. I can minimize my script. It'll take a while it just compiles that, and we're going to test our script. If it works as I imagine it will, our player will just go around the floor nuking everything, which is not the behavior that we get. But it did despawn our character. Let's see if it will despawn this block. It will despawn that. So as a pleasant surprise to myself, it worked the way I intended it to, but not the way I anticipated it would. And that will be because all of these objects don't have triggers on them. They still have colliders. Now, while this works, it's a little bit risky, because if you had lots of other objects in your scene with colliders on, this isn't good practice. But I'll take a happy accident while it's an intro lesson. If I wanted many coins in the game, you can make a duplicate of that by either right-clicking on coin over here and duplicating it. I've now got a second coin, and you can just move the second coin. Or if you're feeling particularly lazy, press Ctrl and D to make a duplicate, and then you can move the duplicate. So I'm just going to test this one more time. As I touch each object with a trigger on it, it should despawn. That one's gone, and you saw it disappear from the list. That one's gone, and that one's gone. But because everything else is not a trigger, it is a collider, it's not being removed when I touch it. So we can work with this if we want to keep it simple. There you go, we're rattling through this. Our final thing for this tutorial is making the score go up by 1 for everything that we collect. To do this, we can go back to our score script, or if it's still open, we can select it here. If you don't have your score script open or you've closed it, go back to Assets, Scripts, there's Score. We can go back to exactly the same thing. We're going to modify this now. At the end of line 4, after the squiggly bracket, give yourself some space by pressing Enter a few times. And we're going to make a publicly visible whole number, going to be an integer, and we're going to call this whole number the score. But Dave, why not call it score? Well, thank you for asking. The reason why you can't call this variable score is we already have a thing called score, which is the name of this script. So you can't recycle the same words within the same script. So I'm choosing to have a variable called the score, which is a part of the score script. When we create the score, we're going to give it an initial value. Remember, that's called initializing, by having it equal our starting value, which is going to be 0, semicolon, to say that you're done. We don't have any score when we start. But every time we go into a trigger and we destroy that other thing that has a trigger on it, so we destroy the cone, press Enter at the end of that line. What we now want to do is to have the score plus equals 1. Semicolon to say that you're done. Remember, it's not saved because we've got the asterisk. Give it a save or Control and S. In order to see the outcome of this, it won't appear on screen. That's for part 2. But if I look at the player capsule object and scroll down to our score script, you can now see there's a new variable that is exposed to the inspector. It's visible, we can access it, and it's accessible because we made it public. It's publicly accessible. We can see that the score is set to 0. The test I'm now performing is if I touch one of these, the score should go up to 1. So let's keep a close eye on it. gone up by 1, should go to 2, should go to 3. There we go. If you're not getting that behaviour, give us a shout and we'll help you with it. So we are now up to this point where you've got making collectibles increase a score. For the next part of the tutorial, we're going to be making that score display on screen, adding enemies, restarting the player's position, setting up a timer, displaying the timer, and adding some minor polish. We look forward to seeing you then.